So we find ourselves at McDonald's, and there's something interesting that I want to talk about for a minute here. I'm going to go on a little bit of a rant, but just be ready because it's going to be a fun one. So when looking at the menu, I noticed that the pictures that we have are so beautiful and elegantly done. Let me give you an example because I got one here for you. You can just see how everything is crafted and created exactly, not only as it is expected to be, but as it should be. It's got all the proportions that a perfect burger has, and what they consider a perfect burger needs. But what you actually get from this is very different. You don't actually get these beautiful classical burgers, you get something very different. Now, what I have here, I will show you in my Big Mac case. Sorry, I already ate mine, so it was really good, I'm sorry. I already ate mine, but we've got a backup burger here. It's not exactly a Big Mac. So what you'll notice is how different it is, how much more real it is. Now, this reminded me of something. And I don't know if this reminds you of the exact same thing, but it definitely hit a chord. And that chord was the Baroque chord. Now, if you're unfamiliar, the Baroque is an art style that ranged from the 1600s, early 1600s, to about the mid-1700s. Now, the Baroque art style is really interesting because it immediately came from the Renaissance. Now, the reason why it came up is actually an entire battle, because Baroque in itself is part of a battle. You see, during this time, the Counter-Reformation was happening, because way back in the 1500s, Martin Luther pinned up his theses, 95 Reasons Why the Catholic Church was Terrible, and that started the Reformation of the Church, which shattered Europe. And the Church fought back. You know how they fought back? They made things real, they made things gritty, they brought things down to earth, they brought it to the people. Very much like McDonald's does here with this fast food. It's bringing it to the people. Now there's something interesting about this. This is counter-reformation of the church and the Baroquean art style that came out of it. A big thing to note is originally the Baroque was seen as a negatory thing by the majority of the people because remember, they're used to the Renaissance. They're used to these beautiful, classical, well-proportioned pictures. So Baroque was using a derogatory term. It actually comes from a Portuguese word meaning misshapen pearl. Fun fact. Now, in the Baroque period, when it first started, there were three major artists. There was Caravaggio, who's brilliant, we love him. There's Poussin and Velasquez. Now, we're going to talk about Caravaggio in a little bit because if you're careful and if you're quick and if you have a good eye, you might be able to catch me at the museum, the Caravaggio exhibit. You got to be quick, otherwise you won't catch me there. But if you are, we've got it.
I know it doesn't translate exactly, but I think it's really interesting to think about the way that these menu items mirror the Renaissance and classical art. I mean, back then they had perfect proportions, they had these golden ratios. The classical and Renaissance art was seen as many pieces, but each piece had to be perfect. Now, these menu items are very, very similar. You've got all these different pieces, and all of them have to, again, be perfect. And I think advertisement does a lot of the same things. You're trying to see the most idealized version of something. And that's the connection we're trying to make here. It's just how idealized and perfect this is compared to the reality and the grittiness of what life holds.
I'm sorry, I didn't see you there. I'm just reading my Phoenix Art Museum guide. You want to know something that's fun about the Phoenix Art Museum? Is that it was built 300 years after the Baroque period. Its grand opening was November 18th, 1959. Sounds like such a long time ago. You know what's interesting about the Ullman Gallery, where we are right now, is that all the artists here were inspired by Caravaggio, sometime around the 1600 mark. Actually, the first artist we're going to take a look at was painting exactly when Caravaggio was alive. Hello again. So what we're going to look at first is a painting by Jacob de Becker. This is known as The Last Judgment. This was done right before the turn of the century, the 1600s, sometime before 1589. We don't know exactly, we just know that's the year that he died. He had a premature death at 30, which I think is somewhat ironic, based on this painting. So if we can take a closer look, come on, closer look. Now, something that's really interesting about this painting is its use of iconography. So we're going to take a quick moment here, and I'm going to show you a little bit about what I mean. So overall, if we look at this painting, essentially what's happening is your characters on the left side are being brought up into heaven by the angels, and your characters here on the right side are being pulled down into hell. And this essentially is that judgment. One thing that you'll see is, though there's a division here between these two characters and the direction they're moving, the whole thing makes a circle, showing that everything's related in its own way. Now, some of those specific icons that I mentioned earlier can be seen down here with the horns and the devils showing kind of a demonic idea. If we come up here, we can see that there's a lily in the book as the angels are holding the people, bringing the people up. And in the middle, of course, we have Christ bringing everyone in. And you can see the pleading and the helping of the people. Now, another interesting fact about this painting that a lot of people don't know is Jacob de Bacter died before it was completely finished. And another artist had to come in and draw in the wings of these angels. Now, in a minute here, we're going to look at some other paintings inspired by Caravaggio that really embellish what the Baroque period is. This is a little bit earlier, but you can still see some ideas of that emotion and that movement. Can you look at the painting a little bit better? Thank you. And you'll get an idea of how it's emotional, and it brings in those feelings and those ideas. And this is just the beginnings of what the Baroque period is. In a moment, we're going to see the full extent of what it can do.
Something you'll notice that's going to be reoccurring a lot with Baroque art is that it's religious in nature. Remember, it's coming from the Counter-Reformation. What's really important to note here is that the church specifically wanted impactful, moving images. You know how you get in people's minds? You know how you get back when they're starting to lose faith? You know how you touch them? Baroquean art. And the Catholic Church knew this. They knew the power of art. You see, the Lutherans, they were destroying art all over the place. They didn't care. They were like the anti-art of the world. But the Christians, they knew what the people wanted. They knew what would strike them and what would hit them. So as we go on, you're going to notice a lot of religious Baroquean art, and that's just a common fixture, especially in the early days. Now later, this emotion, this raw, this power is going to come through in many other ways, which you'll see. But in the beginning, it was a creation of the church. It was the church's tool in the Counter-Reformation to get into the hearts and the minds of the people.
Whew, guys, you're moving way too fast. It's hard to keep up with all of this art they've got at the Phoenix Art Museum. Actually, since we're already in the greatest gallery of the entire museum, we don't really need this anymore. No. Don't look at that.
Okay, real quick, let me sub in for a second before anybody gets mad. The Phoenix Art Museum is amazing, and there's no true best part of it. You gotta check out the museum. Everything about it is great, equally amazing, and there is no true best. Anyway, let's continue.
So here, I bring you to a painting by Gerrit van Honthorst. Now, he's a Dutch artist, and this is right in the thralls of the Baroque period. This is Death of Senegal. Something that's really interesting about this. So this is Senegal, and he's surrounded by his disciples in this particular painting. Now, something I really want you guys to focus on, and this is really what makes it Baroque, is he's dramatizing the way that people feel personal experience. Something else that's happening now is, if you have a little bit of context of what's going on, is there's a Masonic conspiracy against the Emperor of Rome at the time. And Santa here is thought to be part of that conspiracy somehow. So he's actually forced to commit suicide through bleeding. So here you can see his veins are being cut and blood is oozing out. And this is his death right now. And at this exact moment, his friend and fellow disciple is offering him Monty, which, if you're unaware, is a very intense poison. So right after this moment, he drinks the poison, goes into a bath, and Santa dies. But what Baroque does incredibly well is, rather than trying to make this flashy and violent, it brings it down to earth. It contrasts. We have a light, a hidden candle that's right behind this guy's head somewhere. shining in to bring us really deep onto exactly what's going on in this moment. Okay, beautiful. So it brings us in to exactly what's going on. Now I'm going to step back. I'm going to step back for a minute, and I want you to just enjoy this painting from me.
As we look at this painting a little bit more, and we go around the exhibit to look at some of the paintings, I want you guys to notice that as the time moves forward and as we get into the 17th century, we start to break away from the religious art. Now, even though it was birthed from Christianity and it was birthed from the Counter-Reformation, the Baroque period starts to take on a life of its own. And something that I think is really cool about the Baroque period is it's not just painting. It involves architecture, sculpture, theater, and music. It gave birth to opera and Mozart. The Baroque period is a whole lot more than just this depressing, deep art. It became a lifestyle. Artists began to know that they could break the mold and they could branch out from the previous classical strict ideas of what art needed and had to be. People could do what they wanted, they could do how they felt. And this mixture of ideas is really broken. The idea of having art and then having opera and having pictures and having things combined in one thing. Having sculpture and architecture in the same, painting on the walls and the ceilings. This is what the Baroque is about. It's about taking what was strict and rigid and making it your own, making it deep, making it real, making it something that you can relate to. And I think this is why the Baroque period is one of the most influential of all time. The way that art moves and as the future of art comes about, from this point forward it really becomes human. It becomes about the people. And I don't think that would have been possible without the Baroque period. Because up to this point it was something that was paid for and had a purpose and it was put up and it was for reasons. But when you start making it about how you feel and what you do, really start to open up what art can be and what art means. And I think the future of art really needed that. It really needed that push. It needed that battle from the church. It needed that kind of art civil war of what was good and what was bad. And this all hinged in this one period, the Baroque period. I hope that from this talk and this discussion, you, like me, will start to look at the Baroque period in a different way and start to realize why it's so important, why it's one of the most influential periods of our history,